From Capitol News, Illinois, it's Friday, August 15th. Illinois Democrats and Republicans have had their days at the fair. That means the 2026 election campaign is now semi-officially underway. What did we learn from the speeches and rallies, not to mention the corn dogs and funnel cakes? We'll talk about that on this edition of Capitol Cast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Capitol Cast, a regular podcast of Capitol News, Illinois. Jerry Nowicki, Ben Szalinksi, and I all just spent the better part of the past week following elected officials and party leaders around Springfield and around the Illinois State Fairgrounds. One of the long-standing traditions at the fair is the kickoff of the political campaign season. Both major parties have their day at the fair when they bring in speakers and showcase their candidates. This year, both parties are looking far down the road to the 2026 midterm elections. Democrats this year brought in the man who hopes to become the next Speaker of the U.S. House after those elections, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of New York. Republicans, who've been a little slow getting out of the starting gate for this election cycle, brought in Fox News analyst Gianno Caldwell. And for obvious reasons that we'll discuss in a little bit, they also brought in the chairman of the Texas Republican Party, Abraham George. So with all that, suffice it to say, there was an almost infinite number of storylines that any journalist could have followed, and there were plenty of reporters there who did just that. But I thought for our purposes, we would just kind of go around the virtual table here, so to speak, and talk about what stuck out as we were watching those events. Jerry, let's start with you. What was sticking out in your mind after all of the Democrat and Republican days?
It was the clear embrace of Donald Trump and especially like his use of force. We heard Gianno Caldwell say it took guts for the president to order the military takeover of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, he said that actually out at the fair. Let's listen to that and the crowd response once he said that.
At a press conference on Monday, President Trump announced that he is invoking D.C. home rule to include taking control of D.C. police, activating the federal interagency, and D.C.'s National Guard to make our nation's capital safe and beautiful. This took guts. This took guts and a clear example for what we as a party can and should do.
Yeah, so he was talking about Trump's decision to deploy the National Guard onto the streets of the nation's capital, and the audience was applauding there. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's just not concern in the party for the sort of norm-breaking force that Donald Trump is deciding to employ in his presidency. And I think it's especially sort of illuminating because the Illinois Republicans, if they want to gain back a foothold, they need to do it in the suburbs. So, Trump has shown a willingness to activate the National Guard in blue cities now. This is sort of the second one. There was he sent them to California not long ago. So we're looking at a very real prospect that they end up sending them to Chicago, where, Trump will use any type of crime numbers to say that this type of action is needed. So when you look at suburban Republicans looking to make headway, you're looking at, minority leader in the Senate, John Curran, is one of the best in the state at keeping things at a local level, talking about state policies, talking about how it affects constituents. But the reality is, if there is this level of activation, there's going to be potential that his constituents are within a stone's throw of the National Guard occupying city streets if they end up coming to Chicago. But I mean, even in the event that they don't, there's still this Illinois GOP is still in this position where they have to defend themselves against Donald Trump in state elections.
Well, and I think you asked John Curran about that. And for those who don't know, John Curran is a very mild-mannered sort of gentleman he's not a flamethrower like some politicians are. But at the same time, I think he wasn't really ready to come out and cross Donald Trump on that issue. What did you make of his response?
No, well, I mean, Leader Curran, he frequently, likes to he uses Abraham Lincoln's name more than he uses Donald Trump's name, to be frank. He went to the RNC for basically a cup of coffee, but you didn't see him with any of the Trump rigmarole at the time. But I think he's just there. He's going to focus on the fact that the big beautiful bill is a tax cut, and that's going to be what he tries to talk about in terms of the national race.
Okay, Ben, let's turn to you. What stood out in your mind?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I took away from this is just how different our two political parties are here in the state, not just politically, but operationally and what they have to offer. We've seen this time and time again, really, at the fair, and that's kind of where it's most evident, especially over the last 2 years, where Democrats have, a strong base of potential candidates who are entering races for primaries. They know who their candidates are for statewide office. They're very well organized behind those candidates and supporting them. Their party chair is in a pretty secure position. And on the Republican side, I mean, there was probably more talk yesterday just about rumors about how long Kathy Salvi is going to have her job as head of the Illinois Republican Party. There was a handful of people there running for statewide office, but no real big names. And I think it really just kind of, showed just how different they are and how depleted the Republican Party in Illinois has become over the last few years, as one insider told me, that they just don't have a bench of candidates ready to step up to run for office. A lot of people feel, running for a statewide office in Illinois is a lost cause. It's kind of, in some ways leaving voters with one party choice on the ballot just because the Republicans don't have the resources or the operation set up to compete with Democrats in any meaningful way.
I thought one of the interesting things about that aspect is how both state parties are kind of in opposite positions at the state level and the federal level, where Democrats are clearly in command here in the state of Illinois, but they're out of the White House and they're in the minority in both chambers of Congress. Republicans, you can say the same thing. They're completely out of power at the state level, but they are, in command. They've got the White House and majorities, albeit slim majorities, in both chambers of Congress. Democrats generally were very disappointed after the 2024 elections. A lot of them even kind of dejected. And I remember that we have talked about how Governor J.B. Pritzker, when he was addressing the Democratic County Chairs Association, talked about how Democrats need to pull themselves up and move on from the 2024 elections. Let's listen to a little bit of what he had to say.
Folks, over the last 6 months, it seems like there's always someone who wants to dissect what went wrong for Democrats on the national stage in the 2024 elections. There are books and op-eds and resurrected ghosts of past Democratic campaigns showing up on Fox News and on CNN, Substacks by anyone with a computer and an opinion, tortured monologues across social media and TV. The pity party, the circular firing squad, the think tank brainstorming sessions, they just need to be over. Since the dawn of the Republic, political parties have won and lost elections and then won again, and that's what's going to happen to us in 2026.
So there he is saying, let's move on from 2024 and focus on 2026. Are they able to do that?
Yeah, I think they have a lot of ammunition going into 2026. The big beautiful bill is what we learned this week is the big talking point of the Illinois Republican Party. They're very proud of it, but we've seen just headline after headline in the last month or two here just about the cuts to social service programs in that bill, and that's where Democrats are running on. So I think they're really just hoping to capitalize on some of these new policies that have been enacted by Congress and by the president. Lots of the president's executive overreach in many ways. A lot of the norm breaking that we've seen coming out of Washington from President Trump. So yeah, I guess there's a lot. The party has a long way to go in rebuilding trust with the voters. Maybe not necessarily in Illinois because they've been successful, and there's really no signs of that changing in elections here in the state. But nationally, I mean, I think the governor's trying to outline a more positive message, and to simply stop talking about all the things that went wrong in the 2024 election, so they can move on and can craft a message for 2026 that, in the governor's mind, might actually win back some trust from voters, talking about economic issues, talking about what Democrats have to offer. Because we heard a lot from Governor Pritzker at the fair about his success. He's running for a third term on all of his legislative accomplishments that he's achieved in 2 terms as governor. And he really, as a possible presidential candidate, he really thinks that stuff can be replicated on the national stage by Democrats. They just have to talk about it and actually, potentially commit to doing that as well. So, I think there's a long way to go for the Democrat Party, maybe nationally, but it's also a midterm election, and we know that Donald Trump did really terribly in his first midterm election in 2018. So I think Democrats are very hopeful that 2026 is going to look a lot like 2018 did.
I was kind of struck by the fact that in 2024, Donald Trump got almost the exact same number of votes in Illinois that he got 4 years earlier. But the Democratic ticket, with Kamala Harris at the top, got significantly fewer. I think it was close to 400,000 fewer votes than Joe Biden had gotten in 2024, meaning a lot of Democrats stayed home from the elections or just didn't cast ballots. Are they in any better position this year? Is there more enthusiasm? There have been national public opinion polls showing that the Democratic Party's approval rating, their popularity among American voters, is at an all-time low, hovering around 34%. And so when Hakeem Jeffries was in town, he was with Senator Dick Durbin and Congresswoman Nikki Budzinski at an event here in Springfield. I asked him, how do you expect Democrats to take back control of the House, and how do you expect to become Speaker when the Democrats are, this unpopular among American voters? And here's what he had to say in response to that question.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question, because Donald Trump is more unpopular at this period of time than any president in American history. And he started out on January 20th more popular than he had ever been in his 10 years on the public scene. The one big ugly bill, which is now law, is deeply unpopular. 18 points, 19 points, 20 points, 21 points underwater, because the American people don't like the fact that they're ripping health care away from millions of people, stealing food from the mouths of children, and all of this is being done to reward their billionaire donors with massive tax breaks while exploding the debt by more than $3 trillion. It's deeply unpopular.
So basically he's saying, in response to the question about the Democrats' lack of popularity, is that Donald Trump is even more unpopular. I thought it was also worth noting his message about how Trump is cutting federal spending on social programs in order to give tax breaks to upper income people. Those are things that both Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush did during their presidencies. Democrats argued that those were unfair and unpopular, and both of those presidents won re-election. So big question about whether or not that is a winning argument. Meanwhile, while Democratic voters were sitting on their hands, not turning out at the same levels for Kamala Harris in 2024, Donald Trump was able to increase his overall percentage of the vote in Illinois, even though his actual raw number of votes was right about the same. leading the chairman of the Texas Republican Party, Abraham George, to come in and say, hey, Trump got 43% of the vote in Illinois. That's not a blue state. That's a purple state. He actually thinks Illinois is winnable. With a 10 percentage point margin, Republicans would have to pick up about 6 percentage points in order to flip that around, and which I think translates to somewhere around 250,000 votes that have to flip in their favor. Jerry, we'll go to you. Is that doable? Can they find 250,000 votes or 6 percentage points in a statewide race to go in their favor?
Well, if you were at the fair Wednesday, you'd think the answer was obviously not. But if you were at the fair Thursday, you'd say, oh, yeah, absolutely, it's doable. But no, I mean, it's going to be a challenge, frankly. It's those type of turnarounds don't happen quickly. I think we know what Trump's ceiling is in Illinois. I think it was probably pretty close to 2020. The people who have not voted for him, are they now all of a sudden going to flip and say, well, we need more Republicans, in Congress, in the U.S. Senate to help him do the type of things he's doing? I find that unlikely to happen in Illinois. Could he build that number? Could there be enough dissatisfaction with the Democrats in Illinois that there are some House or Senate pickups for the Republican Party in terms of the State House, the General Assembly? I think that's possible too. We still have a legislative session before 2026. It's going to be a hard budget year. We're going to probably have to make some cuts here, or you're going to have to see headlines talking about tax increases here. We still got to fund transit, or Democratic leaders think we need to fund transit. They're going to find a way to do it. Probably won't be that $1.50 package delivery tax, but if that becomes law, you're looking at a new landscape in terms of Democratic policies in the state of Illinois. So I think the session's going to be a big one, but to answer your question, it's going to be a challenge no matter what.
Okay. Well, I did also want to touch on the fact, the reason why Abraham George was here. The Texas legislature, as we all know, has been trying to hold a special session, one purpose of which would be to redraw congressional district maps in Texas. They haven't been able to do that because Texas Democrats have fled the state, with many of them camping out in suburban Chicago, staying in Illinois so that the Texas House can't muster a quorum and vote on this new congressional district map. This could go on for quite a while, but obviously there are going to be attempts in Texas and other states to redraw their maps more heavily in favor of one party or the other. Jerry and Ben, how big of an impact do you think that could have on 2026?
I think, if Texas ultimately decided to go forward with this, it may create more enthusiasm for Democrats to turn out and try and counter those votes. I think if Texas ended up adding 5 new Republican-leaning seats, you would see a huge push from national folks like Hakeem Jeffries, J.B. Pritzker included in that, telling Democrats they have to turn out, they have to go vote in their congressional elections in order to try and flip the House more. They'd put a significantly bigger emphasis on turning out, especially in swing districts, which we don't really have any of those here in Illinois, but we would see those in a lot of other places around the country. So, if they don't go through with it, though, maybe it takes away a little bit of ammunition from Democrats as far as their message on, explaining to voters why they need to turn out. Turnout was obviously their big problem in 2024 and why Kamala Harris lost. They're really looking to avoid that same problem again, and they really need, I think, motivating issues. Sure, the big, beautiful bill is going to be talked about over and over and over again until we get through with this election. But it's really hard to tell, I think, just where the American people stand on it. What do they actually think about it? Are they intimately familiar with the bill? Do they understand how it could impact their lives? I think it's worth noting, as we've talked about a few times, that a lot of the provisions in that bill aren't taking effect until after the 2026 election, in some cases the 28 election. So I think voters aren't really going to see an impact and truly understand this legislation the way Democrats want them to understand it until it actually impacts them, and that's not going to be in the near future.
Okay, and so Jerry, on the subject of gerrymandering, Illinois is already, people say it's among the most heavily gerrymandered states in the country. It's 14-3 in favor of Democrats. Can we go any further? Is there a way to eliminate 1, 2, or 3 of the remaining Republican seats in Illinois?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before, but I mean, even after this week, it's pretty clear that they're not redrawn maps in Illinois. You know, what's to watch is, you know, if Texas follows through on the threat, does California match? And then does, I don't know, Indiana get in the game? Like, is there going to be some type of cascade? But long story short is Illinois sort of made their move on the chessboard when they drew the maps in 2021. Feel like you're stretching it if you think you can even get it to 15-2, especially when no one really says, yeah, that's something we want to do in terms of Democrats in power.
Okay, well, it's the start of what promises to be a very long election cycle. We've got more than a year to go before November of 2026, and a lot more is going to happen between now and then. In the meantime, that's all the time we have for this edition of Capital Cast. Capital Cast is a production of Capital News Illinois, a public affairs reporting project of the Illinois Press Foundation, with significant funding from the Robert R. McCormick Foundation. I want to say thank you to both Jerry and Ben for being here this week. Also want to say thanks to our videographer, Andrew Campbell, who shot a lot of video at the State Fair and the other events. You can see his work on our YouTube channel. You can also check out all of our coverage of the State Fair at capitalnewsillinois.com. In the meantime, this is Peter Hancock on behalf of the entire Capital News Illinois team saying thank you for listening.